national security challenges and U.S. military activities in Europe. We are joined by two witnesses, Dr. Celeste Wallander, who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs for the Department of Defense, and General Ted Wolters, who is the U.S. Air Force Commander for the U.S. European Command. Welcome, both of you. Before we get started with that, tomorrow will be the last day of work in this committee for Paul Arcangeli, who I think most of you know, who is our staff director, has been our staff director for 12 years, I think now, and has been on the committee for 18. And I really want to thank Paul for his service to this committee. As most of us know, he's also a veteran of the U.S. Army, did bomb disposal in the Army before coming to work for the government. And we are all going to miss him terribly, me more so than anybody else. He has done a fantastic job for this committee, but mostly I'm very happy for him. It's a good move. It's been an ever so slightly stressful job for the last few years. So it's a terrific move. Also, Paul's recently married, so big time for him. And very happy for where he's headed. But I can't say enough about the job that he's done for this committee. We are constantly told in this committee about how we pass our bill every year, going on, I think, 61, something like that. And certainly there are a lot of people who contribute to that process, but nobody more so in the last 10 years than Paul. He understands, what this committee is all about, the fact that we work in a bipartisan manner, the fact that we are here to serve the people who serve our country. We do our job so that they can do theirs better, and he knows how to bring people together. And I think that's the thing that I've been most impressed about by the way Paul approaches his job, is he knows it is about people and about relationships. He cares deeply and personally about everybody involved in this process, makes us feel included, and makes us all better at what we do. He has helped build a culture here that enables us to do our job better. And personally, I'm sure I could have done this job without him. I don't think I could have done it well. When I first got this job, I was in a little bit over my head, but Paul was not. And he took the time and the patience to sort of guide me and educate me about that, and also to be a good personal friend, to understand that it's not just about the job, it's about what's going on in everybody's lives, and you have to understand that if you're going to get the best out of people and be most supportive of them. I could go on at great length, but Paul means a lot to me. He will be missed, but again, I want to emphasize, this is not a sad day. We are very happy for him. He has served this country well. He is going to go on to other things in his life and do those every little bit as well, I am sure. And mostly, I just want to thank him for everything he's done for this committee, for this Congress, and this country. So thank you, Paul. We appreciate your service, and good luck. It is an incredibly important hearing that we have this morning, as you all know. There's always a lot going on in the world that is of concern to this committee and of concern to the United States defense policy, but Europe is the central focus right now because of Russia's brutal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and all of the implications that flow from that. So really look forward to the testimony from our witnesses today about the situation there. There's a number of different aspects to it. Certainly, we want to get the latest, the update on what's happening in Ukraine. I think that the President and others have stated our policy clearly. We need to protect Ukraine. Well, basically, there's three key pieces to it. We need to do everything we possibly can to support Ukraine in their fight against Russian aggression. We need to make sure that we don't stumble into a wider war with potentially catastrophic consequences for the entire globe. We do not want a war with Russia, and we have to be cautious about how we approach this to make sure that we don't do that. And lastly, we want to make sure that this is a strategic failure for Putin. A number of people are, asking the question, how does this end? I think the honest question is nobody really knows. But how it should end is with Russia basically going back where they came from, and Ukraine being the sovereign democracy that it is and was and should always be. That's how it should end. Now, that's easier said than done, but I think that goal as our overall policy should be the central focus. So we want to know what's going on in Ukraine. We want to specifically know what we can do to be supportive. The Ukrainians have fought incredibly bravely and better than I think just about anybody expected. We have to give them the help they need to continue that process. And then, of course, there are broader implications beyond Ukraine. What is our policy in Europe? What are we going to do to shore up defenses in Eastern Europe? Without question, NATO is more important now than it has been for a very, very long time, and in particular in Eastern Europe. I met yesterday with Romanian members of the Senate. They are very concerned. They want our support. As you know, Poland, the Baltics, all of the countries in Eastern Europe and throughout Europe are concerned. We need to have an adequate posture in Europe to deter Russia from any further aggression. We want to hear how you're going to put together the plans for that. Well, at the same time, I want to thank both of our witnesses today for the leadership that has brought NATO together to a greater extent than it has been in a long time. I think the whole world was surprised, the degree to which our alliance joined together and in unity responded to this Russian invasion through our support for Ukraine, our support for economic sanctions. I think we have learned beyond any shadow of a doubt that alliances matter, okay? That America first isn't going to get you very far if you don't have friends and allies and people who can work with you in the world to meet the challenges that we face. I want to know how we're going to build upon that going forward. And then lastly, budget was released 2 days ago now, I think. How does that affect what you're trying to do? What are the keys? What is the most important thing that you need to be able to provide that adequate deterrence in Europe? Not the most important thing, but what is the package that is going to be necessary to give us the support necessary? What's most important in the budget? How are we going to make that work? This is an incredibly important theater and a very timely moment to have this hearing, so I look forward to our witnesses' testimony and the questions and answers from members. And with that, I yield to the ranking member, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I concur with your observations, and I also concur with your celebration of our staff director, and I would note that he has Alabama roots, which makes him even cooler, and will be missed. But I want to thank our witnesses, express my appreciation for your service to our country and your preparation for this hearing. We're a month into Putin's catastrophic invasion of Ukraine. The Russian offensive appears to be stalled. If Russian casualties don't exceed 10,000, they soon will. The Ukrainians are starting to retake ground. The time to double down is now. But I'm concerned that's not going to happen. Time and time again, this administration has been petrified of Putin, too afraid that common sense actions to support our partners and allies may be deemed escalatory. As a result, they were way too slow to get aid to Ukraine. We should have started back in Thanksgiving with visible, aggressive deliveries of lethal aid to Ukraine. Instead, the White House wasted months. The first presidential drawdown package didn't start flowing to Ukraine until January of this year. But there weren't any Stingers. U.S. Stingers didn't make it to Ukraine until a week after the invasion. Poland's MiG-29 offer was embraced by the State Department, only to be rejected by the White House. Slovakia is willing to provide S-300s to Ukraine, but the Defense Department can't find suitable backfill. It's been going on for 2 weeks. And there are still no coastal defense cruise missiles, even though Mariupol is being flattened from the sea. And these are just a few examples. There are a dozen more. Dithering needs to end. We need to flip the script and make Putin afraid of escalating against the West. Here's what I'd like to hear from our witnesses today. I'd like to hear that our policy in Ukraine is to win. That means giving the Ukrainians the resources to drive out every last Russian on Ukrainian soil. I'd like to hear that we've identified a backfill for the Slovak S-300 and it's on its way to Bratislava as we speak. I'd like to hear that we have a plan to get coastal defense cruise missiles to Ukraine. I'd like to hear that we're ramping up production of Stingers and Javelin command launch units. We also need to dramatically ramp up production of small tactical UAS systems like Switchblade and get more of these systems into Ukrainian hands. Finally, I'd like to hear that we're going to reinforce our allies with permanent bases in Poland, Romania, and the Baltics. I've been pressing for more dispersed forces in Europe for years. We owe it to our allies and our partners, especially those on the Eastern Front. Nothing less than our full forceful support will do. Finally, General, I know that your time at Eucom is supposed to come to an end in the next couple of months. It's my hope that Secretary Austin sees fit to extend your time a little bit, and so that you can help see us through this crisis. I don't want to make your wife mad, but we need you. So I really think that having a transition at Eucom right now is not in the best interest of our country. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Wallander.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on policy matters related to the U.S.-European Command area of responsibility in my capacity as Assistant Secretary of State of Defense for International Security Affairs. Before I begin, I would like to express my appreciation for the continued support from Congress and this committee in shaping and resourcing the Department of Defense's efforts in this region. It is an honor to appear alongside General Wolters, who is an outstanding partner. This time last year, the focus of this hearing was strategic competition and how that was shaping our world. But today, what we see is no longer a mere theory of strategic competition. Instead, we see Russia engaging in an unconscionable and illegal use of force against Ukraine in the most violent act of aggression in Europe since World War II. The United States condemns Russia's unprovoked attack against Ukraine in the strongest possible terms and deplores the tragic loss of life, enormous human suffering, and indiscriminate destruction caused by Russia's actions. Russia's full-scale invasion threatens not only Ukraine, but also poses the gravest threat to Euro-Atlantic security in decades. We must continuously assess our posture in Europe to address the evolving strategic landscape while maintaining the critical role of our alliance in securing shared interests and values in the region and avoiding escalation with a nuclear power. The Department has three priorities regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. First, we aim to bolster Ukraine's ability to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, for which Congress's assistance is vital. Second, we seek to maintain unity with our NATO allies and our partners. Finally, we will continue to deter any Russian aggression against and defend every inch of allied territory. To those ends, we will continue to provide defensive security assistance to help the Ukrainian people as they defend their country. With thanks to Congress, the United States has committed more than $4 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since 2014, with more than $2 billion since August 2021 alone. I am proud to say that with the leading role from the United States, the global response to Russia's aggression has been remarkable, with unprecedented sanctions and a wide range of global humanitarian and security assistance flowing to Ukraine. There have been notable reversals of long-held restrictions to provide lethal assistance to Ukraine and meet NATO's benchmark of 2% defense spending, as in the case of Germany. Simply put, Russia's attempts to divide the United States from its allies and partners have failed miserably. After Russia's invasion of Crimea in 2014, the United States, with the support of Congress, embarked on substantial changes to our posture in Europe. This involved infrastructure improvements, building partner capacity, increased rotational presence, more exercises and training with allies, and enhanced pre-positioned equipment and stocks. We also focused on expanding our access, basing, and overflight permissions in Europe and increased security assistance funding, especially on NATO's eastern flank. All of these moves have come into play during this crisis, validating our investments and preparations. In the last 2 months, we have swiftly repositioned forces already in Europe, extended specific rotational forces in theater, and deployed significant additional capabilities. These adjustments included placing the entire U.S. commitment to the NATO response force on heightened readiness, repositioning forces to multiple Eastern Flank allies, extending or bolstering maritime forces already in the Eucom AOR, and deploying additional air, ground, space, and cyberspace capabilities. With these recent deployments and extensions, the United States now has approximately 100,000 military personnel, either stationed in or deployed to Europe and its waters. We are also working with allies to ensure that NATO is prepared for modern challenges and able to deter aggression from any adversary. Allies have deployed defensive land and air forces in the eastern flank and maritime assets across the NATO area. For the first time in history, NATO has activated its defense plans and deployed the NATO Response Force in a deterrence and defense role. The People's Republic of China, the PRC, is also active in the Eucom AOR, and we know that the PRC and Russia collaborate across a variety of arenas, including joint military exercises. This is an element of strategic competition that the United States is monitoring closely. This work is only possible with consistent congressional backing and stable funding. Congressional support for the U.S. forces deployed in the Eucom AOR, as well as funding for defense initiatives across Europe and security assistance for Ukraine, have been and will continue to be critical to achieving U.S. national security objectives. Russia's actions have brought to light the stark contrast between our democratic values and our rules-based international system that the United States leads and Russia's autocratic, violent vision. The Department of Defense, in conjunction with other U.S. government departments and agencies, NATO allies and partners, and in close consultation with Congress, will continue to work for a secure and stable Europe. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I appreciate your continued support to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians, and civilians in the Department of Defense who work every day in the service of the American people.
Thank you. General Wolters.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, distinguished members of the committee, and Paul, on behalf of the men, women, and families who serve our nation, we extend our thanks for your steadfast support. It remains a privilege to serve alongside these dedicated patriots and all of our allies and partners. It's also an honor to testify with Assistant Secretary of Defense Celeste Wallander. She's a tremendous force multiplier for our entire team. And appearing with us is our Eucom Command Chief, Phil Easton. He's a force of nature at our headquarters in Stuttgart, Germany, and he leads from the front with respect to treating people with dignity and respect. We're fully aligned with the Department of Defense priorities to defend the nation, take care of our people, and succeed through teamwork. Every day we work to generate peace with our allies and partners by strengthening the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic. This is a pivotal moment in Europe with generational implications. When testifying before this committee last year, Russia was already on the path to further intimidate and threaten Ukraine while testing the will and resolve of the transatlantic alliance. Russia's premeditated and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has galvanized our allies and global partners. We admire the courage and tenacity of the Ukrainian armed forces and citizens, and we so respect their sovereign democracy. In the Euro-Atlantic area, NATO remains the cornerstone of deterrence and defense. As we face the largest conflict in Europe in 3 generations, our transatlantic alliance has responded in all warfighting domains. In the air, NATO has established an air defense architecture along the eastern flank that includes contributions from 11 separate allies. On land, allies continue to deploy additional forces to enhance its forward presence from Tallinn in the north to Sofia in the south. At sea, our standing maritime forces are infused with additional capabilities to ensure freedom of navigation spanning from the Arctic to the south to the Aegean. Aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean dramatically increase the inherent air combat capability in NATO's air defense architecture along the entire eastern flank. NATO's capabilities in space and cyberspace are more closely integrated than at any other time in the alliance's history. The sum of these modern multi-domain capabilities underwrites the security of NATO's Article 5 guarantee. A protagonist of our commitment to NATO begins with our efforts in the United States European Command. Our primary mission is to compete, deter, and prepare to respond to aggression with the full weight of the NATO alliance. Our investments in military-to-military relationships, training, and readiness build unity, resolve, and combat credible deterrence. U.S. Eucom, with support from forces in the continental United States, has sparked the allies to enhance posture along the eastern flank, rapidly deploying 3 brigades of European base and CONUS-based combat forces, a carrier strike group, and 4th and 5th generation fighters. This effort is America's effort, with soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, guardians, and Defense Department civilians from all 50 states and territories, some based in Europe, others rotating into Europe from across the nation. This build is enabled by years of focused investment through the European Reassurance and Deterrence Initiatives, as this committee well knows, commonly referred to as ERI and EDI. These enhancements, including facilities, pre-positioned equipment, rotational deployments, and all-domain exercises, has improved our speed and agility. As a brief example, thanks to EDI and ERI, we were able to deploy the entirety of an armored brigade combat team from Georgia in the United States to Germany in just 1 week. That level of speed is unmatched globally. On behalf of the men and women of the European Command, we thank Congress and the American people for their contributions in this effort. The capabilities the Department has brought to bear in response to this acute security environment have required critical partnerships with U.S. Transcom, U.S. Cybercom, U.S. Stratcom, and the intelligence community. These partners are vital to establishing and sustaining our current deterrence and defense posture. We are witnessing a generational moment, a historic demonstration of unity and will, and an unprecedented effort by allies to strengthen defense while simultaneously helping those in need. Just an example, but it's a very critical one. We've seen Germany commit to meet the alliance 2% benchmark, and we expect other allies will follow and redouble efforts to adequately invest in defense to generate peace. From Turkey in the southeast to Norway, Sweden, and Finland in the north, in air, land, sea, space, and cyber, our allies and partners are committing. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you. General Wolters, I think one of the central questions is the issue that the ranking member raised about what we can provide for Ukraine. I think part of it is that balance between giving Ukraine the help and not spreading to a wider war. And certainly before the war began, the issue of what we should give to Ukraine was informed by that, deterrence versus provocation. And I would say that a concern about giving Russia an excuse and provoking them is the reason some of those weapons weren't provided. It's the same reason that President Trump did not provide those weapons either, as we were trying to walk our way through that. But now that the war has begun, how do you balance that risk? I mean, do we take Mr. Rogers' approach and basically say we don't care what Putin does? You know, we should, I don't know, send troops and tanks and whatever we can in and basically fight in Ukraine? Or what is the proper way you think to strike that balance? And what are you concerned, or are you concerned about how Russia might respond to a given action? And would they spread the war to Poland, to the Baltics, conceivably even to U.S. assets in the region? How do you balance that risk?
Chairman, as a military commander, my first answer is constantly. The conditions change second by second, day by day, week by week. And I bear the responsibility, number one, to ensure that we don't forget as military commanders that nations have the inherent right to gift whatever they would prefer from a multi-domain, from a unilateral, bilateral, multilateral perspective. Secondly, I have to take into account military mission effectiveness coupled with strategic miscalculation. And one day is different than the next, and so depending upon the conditions, we have to adjust.
So do you think there, how would you specify the risk of Russia escalating? And how do you think about that? I know it's something you think about. What's the risk there, and what might we do that could provoke it, and what would it look like?
It depends, and the risk that we have to gauge is the risk that Russia first imposes upon Ukraine. So we have to be smart about imaging our way through Ukraine's military perspective and then taking into account what the allies and partners can contribute. And we're always concerned about the force protection disposition of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian citizens and obviously the populations on the periphery. But all of that has to come into our cross-check.
But outside of Ukraine is what I'm trying to get at. Is there a risk that if we, get more engaged, that Russia would spread the war, and if so, how would they spread the war and to where?
There's always a risk, and they obviously are capable of utilizing all domains and their whole of government capabilities. So as a military mission planner, I've got to take into account all of those branches and sequels. And obviously, as a NATO commander, I am most concerned about the eastern periphery of Europe as it connects to Russia.
Okay, so, but we can, in fact, provide a lot of weapons to Ukraine within that manageable risk, and I think we are doing that. What's most important to your mind in terms of what weapons we need to get into Ukraine right now to help them? And I agree with Mr. Rogers. The goal here is to push the Russians out and win the fight. What are the most important weapons Ukrainians need right now to make that happen?
I can go deeper in a classified session, Chairman, but what I can say is those capabilities that are anti-armor, anti-tank, and surface-to-air missiles are very, very important. They have been effective in the campaign, and I suspect in the near future they will continue to be effective.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to correct the record in saying that President Zelensky has never asked for American troops to come and fight on Ukrainian soil, nor have I. We want them to get everything they ask for that they need to win this war, and that's my position. The DOD comptroller announced yesterday, and I was surprised to hear, that there were 0 changes made to the president's budget based on the Ukrainian invasion. Is that accurate, Dr. Wallander?
Congressman, I have not seen that reference. I apologize. I can't validate whether that is true. I can take that question back to get you a solid
I just can't imagine we wouldn't be adjusting the budget to reflect what's happening in Eastern Europe right now.
Yep.
You heard me say in my opening remarks that Slovakia has offered S-300s, which are desperately needed by Ukraine, but all they've asked for is us to backfill. Why is it taking 2 weeks for us to not get them something? Tell me the cavalry's on the way.
Yes, Congressman. We are working with Slovakia to identify the requirements for meeting their needs. I can speak, and General Wolters can speak in greater detail during the classified session, but we are working on this, and meanwhile, we have focused on getting countries that hold Soviet legacy systems, including S-300 systems that have spare parts, missiles, different parts of that S-300 system, who are willing to send that to Ukraine. So we have not simply been waiting for a resolution of that offer, but have been working on getting the Ukrainians what they need right now.
And when is that going to be?
That is ongoing, and we can talk in greater detail in the classified session.
Okay. Well, I would urge that you continue to keep this committee updated on your progress, at least on a weekly basis. General Wolters, you and I have talked many times over the last couple of years about the need for the redistribution of our troops in the European command and to establish permanent basing in Poland, Romania, and in the Baltics. What is your best military advice as to whether or not permanent U.S. forces in Poland, Romania, and the Baltics will help reassure NATO and deter Russia? Congressman,
it's got to change. And certainly this is an opportunity as a result of this senseless act on behalf of Russia to re-examine the permanent military architecture that exists not only in Eastern Europe, but in our air policing activity in aviation and in our standing naval maritime groups. And as you well know, we're in the process of establishing 8 very coherent minimum battalion-sized battle groups in Eastern Europe that have all the appropriate enablers that are coupled in with all the air policing assets and all the standing naval maritime groups so that we can more comprehensively defend in the east and do so in the north all the way back to the Atlantic Ocean, extending back into the Mediterranean. And in so doing, the NATO nations that are committing, that I alluded to in my opening comments, they're going to be part of the equation, and they're very willing to do so to change the presence from a rotational to a more permanent, and I think it will continue to grow, and we're working very hard with the North Atlantic Council to do just that.
Well, and I think that's an important point. You know, I talked earlier about the Ukrainians not asking us to put troops there. They haven't asked us to give them anything. They're willing to pay for the stuff they're asking for. They just want us to get it to them. And in Poland, the Polish government's offered to pay for us to establish a permanent base there. Everybody wants a base, but that's the first time I've ever heard of a country willing to pay for it. So I do hope that we see that happen. The rotational troop presence is not adequate. It needs to be permanent. And I think that, going back to the chairman's opening statements, the best way that we can solidify and enhance our relationship with our NATO allies is to have that permanent basing there to show that we are committed to this relationship. Lastly, on the Switchblade, that's one system that I've examined, and it seems to be something that would be effective. Dr. Wallander, are you familiar with that system?
Yes, Congressman, and we have, like you, been focused on its capabilities and received the message loud and clear from our Ukrainian colleagues that this is required. We have committed 100 Switchblade tactical unmanned aerial systems to be delivered in the most recent package of presidential drawdown. So we've taken that, we've heard the Ukrainians, and we take that very seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And of course, we should all remember we also passed a $13.4 billion supplemental out of Congress signed by the President specifically to deal with Ukraine. Mr. Lanchman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Let me begin, well, with both of you. I have a question on cyber related. The Russian Federation obviously has continued to leverage cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns against Ukraine, Europe, and the United States. Though we have not yet seen the level of cyber activity that we had anticipated from Russia, we still have to be ready for it. How are you preparing your cyber defenses for the potential cyber attacks from the Russian Federation? And I also want to know how you're helping us to bolster the cyber defenses of our European partners and NATO to the degree that we can talk about this in open session.
Congressman, first and foremost, we went to the basics with respect to cyber employment. And as you well know, a great cyber offense starts with a great cyber defense. So I know that General Nakasone and team were very, very aggressive with respect to assisting the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian Department of Defense to improve their network hygiene and network defense. And those efforts started in the November-December timeframe. And the same considerations were given to those European nations on the periphery. And we can talk in more detail in a separate session, but that good defense has been very, very helpful. And I think it reveals in some of the challenges that Russia has faced with respect to their cyber offense against the Ukraine and against the European nations on the periphery.
Thank you. And Dr. Wallander, our national defense strategy calls for us to utilize the concept of integrated deterrence. I believe certainly cyber is a critical part of our deterrence capabilities in coordination with other deterrence methods. In this unclassified setting, to the degree which you can, how are we working further with NATO to utilize our cyber capabilities, particularly within the context of the European Deterrence Initiative?
Congressman, thank you for your question, because integrated deterrence does include the cyber domain, and the United States has worked closely with allies to improve their resilience, to monitor networks, to share information, and that work is ongoing because the challenge of Russian activity in the cyber domain is persistent. That element of the deterrence is not only about capabilities. In the NATO context, it is about the multinational nature of the alliance and the commitment to defend one another and combine together the efforts of NATO allies in the cyber domain, send a very strong, credible message to Russia that helps to reinforce that deterrent message.
Thank you. Yeah, incredibly important to leverage those capabilities wherever possible and working with our partners and allies to strengthen those capabilities. Dr. Wallander, first of all, I want to commend both President Biden and the Biden administration, the Department of Defense, and our European partners and allies for supporting Ukraine and really stepping up to the challenge in this historic crisis is caused by the Russian Federation. And I agree with the Chairman's comments that we need to make sure that Russia is pushed back and that Ukraine stays free and independent. In your view, are there any further ways that Congress can help provide better support to Ukraine? I know we've talked about this already, but in a further ability to elaborate on any thoughts you may have, and have there been any barriers that we can overcome to help you get through? And what about when it comes to humanitarian assistance as well?
Thank you for that question, Congressman, and I want to reiterate our gratitude for not only the scale of the assistance that the Congress has provided in budget support, but the speed with which Congress took this as a priority so that we're able to support Ukraine. This fight is, because of the courage and the capability of the Ukrainian military forces and citizens, this fight is going to extend. And so looking forward, first of all, we do have, in addition to the option of presidential drawdown, we have the Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative, and we're looking at what that next set of package should contain, with an eye towards not just days and weeks, but months of sustainment, perhaps longer, for the Ukrainian military and Ukrainian people. I would, defer to Department of Treasury and Commerce, but clearly the Ukrainian government, in addition to security assistance, needs humanitarian assistance and economic assistance now that it's clear that this fight is going to continue for some time into the future. So we look forward to working with you on a broad multi-agency support for Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Wilson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you for being here today. What a time in history. And many of us never anticipated a land war in Europe ever again. But that's where we are, and to face it. And Putin did one thing totally unintentional. He has unified Republicans and Democrats. You will see that together we agree with President Biden that we're in a long-term conflict between autocracy, which is ruled by gun, or democracy ruled by law. And so we need to be together, and that's why I'm really grateful that working together with myself, with Congressman Marcy Kaptur, the issue that has come up is the delay in providing the equipment to the people of Ukraine. How brave they are standing up to the Russian military. And as Congresswoman Kaptur pointed out yesterday, there is body armor awaiting in a storage area in Chicago for the U.S. Department of Commerce to approve delivery. That's absurd. We need both of you with positions you have to act quickly. And then particularly I'm grateful, Secretary Wallander, that you've been the president of the U.S.-Russia Foundation. So you have such a knowledge of Russia. And along with that, as Ranking Member Mike Rogers indicated, we should have months ago been providing the military equipment to the people of Ukraine. In fact, I appreciate that Mark Levin has revealed that in August, in the Kremlin website, there was an essay by Vladimir Putin that really, in the tradition of Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler, he says the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. That's not what he means. What he means, the unity means no existence of the country of Ukraine. And so hopefully, particularly General Fayuk, I hope the intelligence is provided as to how we can best protect the people of Ukraine. And with that in mind, for each of you, what are the weaknesses that you see in Russian military and or their diplomatic efforts? What can we do to exploit those weaknesses? Try to bring to the people of Russia that they are being betrayed by Putin, the young people of their country. He is just putting at risk of imminent death only for oil, money, power. Madam Secretary.
Well, on the political military front and the weaknesses, the Russian narrative, and you yourself have, pointed to how absurd and non-plausible the Russian claims as a pretext for the invasion of Ukraine are to the international community. So the work of the United States closely with allies and partners to expose what the Russians were preparing to do, the pretexts in which, and the absolutely without foundation pretext, has galvanized the international community more rapidly than any really expected, in contrast to the experience in 2014 when they invaded Crimea. So I think that has been a key element of the weakness in a political military sense that has enabled us to pull together the unity on sanctions, on assistance to Ukraine, and on diplomatic isolation of the Russian leadership.
Thank you, General.
Congressman Wilson, I think it goes back to the point you just made at the beginning. As a military commander, I want to do everything I can to strengthen our support to Ukraine armed forces based off where they are in the midst of their campaign. And from a whole of government perspective, with respect to what nations do to include the U.S., everything that we're doing in the information environment needs to continue and it needs to strengthen.
And Secretary, indeed, it's so impressive to see NATO unified, 21 countries. As the co-chair of the EU caucus, to see 27 countries, unprecedented, of the European Union providing military assistance. And then we need your influence too. There are two countries that should be doing more. Israel, which in a destabilized world, they've already had 3 attacks in the last week, murderous attacks. Another country, India, the world's largest democracy. Instability in the world will lead to catastrophe for the terrific people of India, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi and their wonderful government needs to understand that they need to be standing with democracies, standing with Ukraine.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Larson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Wallander. I want to pull back a little bit. It's going to be a lot of Ukraine questions. This is more of a NATO policy question. NATO is looking to launch something called Diana, which is their tech accelerator. And I just wanted to get your view on the department's view of the Defense Innovation Accelerator of the North Atlantic. It's a NATO project, kind of, it's a mashup, if you will, like our DARPA and DIU and a few other things. Can you just quickly update us on where the department is on that?
Congressman, I don't have details on where the status of that project is. Here I can would get back to you with details. But what I do know is that as NATO allies have recognized not just the scale of the threat that Russia poses to European security, but the multi-domain challenges that both Russia and China pose to global security and certainly also to NATO, the willingness to cooperate more in the area of technology going forward has deepened and has strengthened, and this project is an opportunity to advance that.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to make sure it's on the record and not lose this opportunity to ask that. General Wolters, I want to follow up on something Representative Wilson brought up, and it's kind of just show how international affairs is local affairs. In Washington State, we have about 100,000 Ukrainian Americans. My district is like 16th out of 435 in terms of number of Ukrainian Americans in the country. It's always a surprise for people to hear that. And so we asked the community some questions about what they wanted to ask, and this gets to Representative Wilson's question about aid and personal protective equipment and the ability to deliver that to the civilian population in Ukraine. Can you give us some detail on how that is happening?
Congressman, we at US Eucom have 2 centers with approximately 100 individuals that continue to iterate in the military dimension with Ukrainian liaison officers that are working both the security assistance items in the military dimension and the humanitarian assistance items. And it's an iterative process, and it's based off supply and demand, and extends with feelers into Ukraine at the ministerial level and at the Chod level to make sure the right stuff goes in at the right time to deliver the appropriate effect in the campaign based off access to get in and access to get out. It's not perfect by any means, but it continues to improve over time. And we'll continue to iterate and make sure that we continue to connect with those interlocutors at the Ukrainian level to ensure that they get the right gear as quickly as we possibly can.
Is there an issue with moving it into Poland or into Romania now, if you will, and then so it's there instead of in the U.S.?
Sir, it's by, with, and through Poland, and it's by, with, and through Romania. I can talk a little bit more in a classified setting, but there are challenges. But at the end of the day, we always communicate with the host nation to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, sure. And to go even more local, but it's obviously a national issue. The Growler mission is located in Aswidby Island, and there's news yesterday, a couple days ago, that we're sending a national mission squadron to Germany, and I presume there's a CVN squadron already on the Truman and the Aegean Sea as well. And this might be a classified answer to a question, but can you give us some idea about either mission, maybe starting with the national mission into Germany?
Sure, I can elaborate more in a separate setting, but what I can say is you're right. They're coming.
Okay. I look forward to that. What do I do with my last minute, Mr. Chairman? I'll yield. I'll yield it back. Thank you. That's fine. I'll yield.
And a programming note, I know some classified stuff has come up. So the plan is we're going to be here until 12:30, 12:45-ish, and then we'll start our classified brief at 1. Give you a brief break in there. Mr. Turner is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I appreciate your statements about Ukraine, and specifically you said, we want to strengthen our support for Ukraine. And I know that your efforts to do so are incredibly important. I want to talk to you about the sharing of intelligence. There was a great deal of concern initially when the conflict began that the United States had actionable intelligence that could assist the Ukrainians in having an ability to defend their country, and that there was delays in getting that intelligence to Ukraine. Are you comfortable now with the speed at which our ability is to share that information with Ukraine? And do you think that as looking to strengthening our support for Ukraine, are there gaps or areas that we need to address?
Congressman, I'm comfortable, but I want it to speed up. And I always will say that even if it occurs in 1 second, I want it tomorrow to be in a half a second. And as you well know, the DNI's participation and the NSA's participation at the very start of this campaign were revolutionary. And as SACEUR, what I needed most to do was get that data to the nations to get the NAC to be convinced soonest to make the appropriate moves based off the disposition in the periphery of Ukraine. As good or bad, it's better than I've ever seen, and we achieved consensus from a NATO body quicker than we ever have in the past, and it was a result of the intelligence sharing, but it needs to continue to get faster.
General, that's a great point. I know everyone's always frustrated with the speed of sharing because, and also, there has to be some assessment as whether or not the intelligence is important and whose hands does it need to get into. And of course, dealing with Ukraine, you're dealing with an area where there's a conflict. General, are there restrictions on geography in Ukraine as we look to Ukraine and the Donbass region, areas of conflict, and trying to help Ukraine? Are you seeing instances where we're tying our own hands, where there are limitations geographically within their own country, where the United States is unwilling to share information with Ukraine about what Russia is doing in its own country?
Sure, I haven't seen that. It's just access to some of the far eastern cities. And as you well know, that's a challenge for humanitarian assistance as well as intelligence sharing. And as we image our way through this campaign and we provide our best military advice to our Ukraine counterparts, we continue to make them aware of this very issue, and they are iterating in an attempt to improve.
And what do you mean by access to the Far East cities?
Just the tyranny of time and distance over land, going from Eastern Europe to the Mariupol region.
But your ability to generate intelligence isn't limited by space.
It is not, but just getting that data into the right receptor.
Got it. Dr. Wallander, I want to thank you for your, on page 12 of your report that you included the issue of the Balkans and referenced the Dayton Peace Accords. I do think that is an area where we've continued to have vulnerabilities that we've kind of ignored. The issue of Republic of Srpska, the ability for Russia to destabilize the area, I think needs our increased attention, and I appreciate that you continue in your European focus to look at that as an issue. I have a question for you, though, about Ukraine. We do hear that of the number of refugees and the individuals who've been displaced in Ukraine, the number of refugees who've left Ukraine, but we're also hearing reports of individuals being taken against their will from Ukraine to Russia. But we're not hearing much from the White House about that. What can you confirm for us about individuals being taken from Ukraine against their will to Russia?
Congressman, I've seen the reports that you refer to as well, and they are very concerning. I don't have anything any independent information that I can confirm here, but I can get back to you on what
Great.
we are able to do.
I would really appreciate that.
On that front.
General, we had good news of the Germany returning to the F-35, where they had initially indicated they were not going to be part of the F-35 family. Finland has agreed to become part of the F-35, and now Canada has made its announcement. Great effects of Russia's aggressiveness. Tell us strategically how you think that the number of nations that are now committing to the F-35 will affect the strategic capabilities of NATO and our partners as they face Russia.
They'll deliver a tremendous improvement in our strategic ability in indications and warnings, command and control, and mission command, as already demonstrated by U.S. F-35s that are contributing in the assure and deter mission at this time. And we anticipate,
And
Congressman—
I do apologize, Jim's time has expired. Mr. Courtney is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both witnesses this morning. And to General Wolters, again, I went and reread your bio. I mean, you have been showing amazing leadership, not just since the invasion of Ukraine, but going back to when you took the helm in 2019. Again, for a lot of us in this committee, we remember in 2020 that there were efforts to cut U.S. troop levels in Germany and eliminate the rotation of Marines up in Norway. And your steadfast I think adherence to duty in terms of the value of NATO has been certainly validated over the last months or so. And again, I just want to publicly thank you for your great service. You mentioned in your remarks about how the U.S. recognizes our allies, great collaboration, but also that their own sovereign ability to gift resources. Last Saturday, the Ukrainian foreign minister publicly stated that, based on his conversations with officials in Washington and in Poland, he stated that the U.S. has no objections to the transfer of aircrafts, MiGs, from Poland to Ukraine. And he went on to say, as far as we can conclude, the ball is now on the Polish side. Again, this was Saturday, so this was just a couple days ago. And again, there's a lot of high interest, certainly back home in my district with a large Ukrainian population. Can you just clarify for me, and for I think a lot of us, what is the state of play in terms of, the decision maker to get that, I think, critical platform to the Ukrainian Air Force?
Well, sir, at the national level, I would suspect it's the Prime Minister or the President that ultimately makes that decision, given the potential for strategic miscalculation, and that's what I've seen in practice so far. And in a different setting, I can get into some of the more tactical level details that weigh into the decision, but again, it goes back to the military mission effectiveness weighed against strategic miscalculation to make sure you take into account the protection of the citizens of Ukraine as well as the citizens on the periphery. So all those variables have to come into play. But you just described accurately where I believe the situation currently sits, and nations still continue to look at this issue, and they will still continue to examine it, and we'll still provide our best military advice, and we'll do so based off conditions in the environment at the time.
Well, thank you. I think, again, your answer was very edifying in terms of getting clarity on that. And again, I think the Ukrainian pilots have done just magnificent work. And if there's ways that we can get them more jets, I think that would certainly be much, beneficial, be very beneficial. We've heard, again, some of the back and forth regarding the speed with which material is getting into Ukraine. Dr. Wallander, you and I spoke offline a little bit about sometimes overlooked combatant command, which is Transcom. And I just wonder if you could just kind of give a general sense of just the speed and efficiency with which General Van Ovos and her team is proceeding to get material into the NATO and ultimately to Ukraine.
Yes, Congressman. I mean, it is pretty extraordinary, especially since the U.S. has been able to focus on the option of presidential drawdown to be able to pull the kinds of capabilities that the Ukrainians have been prioritizing from U.S. stocks. And then through Eucom, all credit to General Wolters and his team, working with Transcom, in some cases to move from the moment of approval to actual delivery of those capabilities within days, and certainly, within weeks. So it's been an extraordinary effort by the U.S. military, and it's made a difference on the battlefield for Ukrainian forces fighting Russia.
As General Omar Bradley once said, strategy is for amateurs, logistics is for professionals. And I think Transcom has really risen to the task and shown that they are true professionals. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lamborn is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Wallander, I have a question for you first. And these questions are based on the limited information we've been given out so far on the nuclear posture review. We've seen 3 paragraphs. We haven't seen the full review. But even with that, there are some serious concerns that I have based on that language. It seems that the declaratory policy of the use of nuclear weapons has been narrowed, that it will be only to deter nuclear attack, and there's no mention of deterring non-nuclear strategic attack or to achieve any other U.S. objectives. And to me, the more limit that we have on our range of action, that gives more freedom of action to potential adversaries. So is that a limitation for sure? And if so, did you have any conversations with allies or partners about this narrowing of our policy?
Congressman, thank you. To your second question first, the U.S. has consulted with allies and on the nuclear posture review, previewing some of its outcomes. And my understanding, I wasn't in those consultations personally myself, but the reports I have is that allies were very satisfied and did not have concerns about the content of the nuclear posture review, the language. The nuclear posture review language does not apply exclusively to nuclear attack, but extends to extreme circumstances that would require the United States to defend allies and partners. I'm misquoting the precise language, but there is absolutely a provision that is continuity with previous posture review statements.
Okay, well, on that, we can continue our conversation after we see the full review. That would be very helpful when that comes out. General Wolters, I have a question for you based also on the limited information we have on the NPR. Admiral Richard has said that the nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile is intended to deny potential adversaries any mistaken confidence that limited nuclear employment would provide an advantage over the United States, its allies, and partners. So if we're going to limit or do away with the future of funding for the SLICM-N, to me, that goes against what Admiral Richard has said about it. Do you agree with what Admiral Richard said about the utility of the SLICM-N?
I do, Congressman, and I know his words were attempting to drive home the fact that having multiple options exacerbates the challenge for the potential enemies against us.
Exactly, exactly. So it would be your best military advice that we continue the development of that particular option?
It would, and I agree with Admiral Richards.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up question, General Wolters. The proposed budget of the Biden administration would retire the B-83 gravity bomb. As you recall, a decision was made a few years ago to keep it in effect until other capabilities would supplement that capability. Were you asked for your best military advice about retaining the B-83 capability?
Congressman, I was not on that particular issue. I'm only familiar with it as a result of what's coming next, and I know that Admiral Richards is making sure that there's no gap. But that's as far as I can go with that one.
So can you comment on your best military advice about using the B-83 currently to deter aggression in your AOR?
Again, it's I would concur with the utilization of that to complicate the challenges of the enemy against us, as long as there's not another system that is in place. And I know that's part of the issue with the transition.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.